Oh my gosh,
That's
that
a
just
good one.
exploded. We are back in an explosive return to the Dad Bod pod. We're pretty excited about this one. We've got our good friend, Britt. Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm going to kick it over to her to give a very high-level overview of why she is the perfect candidate to be helping us with this conversation today. So, Britt?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, first of all. I'm excited to be here. So I'm Britt, and I think why I'm here is that for about 4 years of my professional life, I spent in the University of Pennsylvania's Positive Psychology Center and learned a lot about positive psychology, the ways it can help people build relationships and network, and also just sort of self-improvement and things like that. And then for the last 3 years, I took all of that knowledge and started building courses for a coach training company, and recently finished a relationship coaching course to help people figure out how to navigate some of those concepts and build their relationships into something stronger. And we focus on intimate relationships, parent-child relationships, sibling relationships, as well as professional relationships and so on. So I think that's why you guys have me here.
That is absolutely why she's here today. Britt also runs a small business called Britt Leigh Writes. I will have the link to all of her pages in the description below. And if you stick till the end of the video, we'll give her a couple minutes to kind of tell you all about the business. So stay tuned for that.
Shop small.
Shop small. Shop small, think big. So today we're going to be kind of focusing on, the relationship with your significant other after having children. It's a huge event in your life, and there's a little bit more work that has to go into not just everyday life, but the relationship that you have with your significant other.
I bet there's probably 753 different ways we could take this. But luckily for us, because we're very simple-minded, you wrote your kind of opinions on what you thought we should talk about. So I thought the one I really liked on there was maintaining a friendship in your relationship. So if we could kind of dig into that one, that'd be hugely helpful.
Yeah, I think it's funny. This actually relates kind of to my freelance business because I also write wedding vows and wedding speeches. And one of the number one promises that couples make to each other is like, I promise to date you, or I promise to be your best friend. But what does that really mean when you're thinking about, dating your spouse or being a best friend to your spouse? And this kind of ties in nicely to a topic that we teach called love maps. And the best way I feel like I can kind of explain this that would be really helpful for you and maybe your audience is using an analogy with fantasy football.
I'm in.
You got us.
Sold. Got it. Okay, so talk to me for a minute about leading up to draft night. I know my husband participates with you all, so I know what that looks like on my house.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about when you the weeks before, the days leading up to draft night, what's on your mind? What are you doing? What's happening?
We're also very interested in what goes on your house. We can talk about this later, but any insight there would be much appreciated.
Sure. Although I don't know that you want his insight.
No, I just want the story.
You got a tough one. I take fantasy football seriously. I think it's one of those things that just especially even now, it's just something I know it's a problem. It's a good way to connect with my friends. It's a great way to keep up with football, which I obviously am passionate about. Am I in too many leagues? Probably. Could I cut it back? Definitely. But, I enjoy it, and it all comes down to the preparation. So again, because I take it seriously, I have weeks and months of preparation and following news and figuring out draft strategies, doing different mock drafts and stuff like that. So I definitely put some effort into it, even just listening to podcasts, you know what I mean? Any kind of, I could be doing a different task, but if I'm listening to something about football, I might pick up a thing or two. So there's definitely a lot of preparation for me, at least. What about you?
Hopefully this isn't telling of our relationships, but I'm 30 minutes before, I'm definitely digging into some stuff. I'm trying to look at who's starting, just look at the who's the starting running back, who's backing up. I haven't read much, and it works out sometimes.
Yeah.
And this is why Dave just beat me for the championship this week. So
yeah, I knew Eric was not doing so hot.
He had a rough go.
Yeah.
But he's normally not like that, so it kind of felt good to see that happen. It's all right.
I don't think he felt so good
No,
about
I bet.
So lots of preparation, lots of thought goes into it. There are some people that I've met and talked to who love fantasy football so much that they can tell you all of the players, like what college they went to, what high school they went to, what year they were born, their stats, how tall they are, how much they weigh. So now if I say to you, like, okay, what is the number one thing on your wife's mind right now?
Right now, she's definitely just relaxing, like getting her own peace of mind of getting through a day. Because right now our kids are in a little bit of like a tough stretch, especially at nighttime. So a lot of times when they get down, we both sit down on the couch and like, all right, we did it. Like, let's take a second. And so I came here right before that. So I know right now she may have a glass of wine and she's cuddling with our dog and just taking like a
beat.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely what she's doing right now.
What about you? What's like, if I had to guess, what would be like the number one thing on Court's mind?
Probably I wish Rob would have cleaned a little more before people came over.
Sorry, Court.
No, but I think it's the same thing, right? At the end of the night, it's days, as your kids start to get older, it feels like the days get kind of longer. So, like, you start, like, you don't sleep in any later, but your kids end up staying, like, a little bit later. They push the limit, and then your time to just shut off becomes less and less. So, when you do get them, that's what she's doing right now. She's definitely probably scrolling socials and watching the worst TV on
no
imaginable.
Judgment.
Yeah. Well, we know, yeah. But yeah.
And so
same thing.
there's also like easy wins in this category too, right? Like, so thinking back to fantasy football, you know, knowing who the starters are, like that's pretty easy top level information to find. Yeah. Just like your wife, hopefully you know like her favorite color, her, you know, favorite thing to eat, her favorite beverage. Yeah. But as you start to peel those layers back and you need to, like, what are the other things? Like, what is she most worried about in life? What keeps her up at night? What are some of the things that, you know, she has on her mind about your children and what's going on there? And that's sort of what love maps are. So love maps are a way to maintain a friendship by basically what love maps are. They're based on John Gottman's work. So he's like the number one leading psychiatrist, psychologist in the country on relationships. Okay. And his team is brilliant because they can predict whether or not a marriage will succeed with like 97% accuracy.
That's insane.
Insane. I read this book and I was like, ooh.
Could you imagine going in like with your significant other and they're like, oh yeah, there's a, you know, an 85% chance that you are going to be divorced.
Yeah.
How do you walk away from that?
Well, so what's beautiful about his work is he tells you like, this is the path that you're on. These are the pitfalls. Okay. So how can we help you steer away from that so that you can have a successful marriage, right?
Well, that's a better way, because when somebody tells you it's not going to work, you've already got that in your mind.
Right.
You like walk out of the office. So,
I don't think they tell them. They just sort of predicted it.
Good thing we drove separate.
Yeah. Yeah, his experiments are really interesting, and I recommend the book. It's really, really amazing. But one of the concepts he talks about is love maps, and basically what love maps are is your sort of ability to have cognitive space, the cognitive space you hold for your spouse, for your significant other, and for other people in your life too, your children, your family, things like that. And so the reason that this is important is it sounds really simple, right? Like, do you know your wife's favorite color? What are her best friends' names? Mm-hmm. What is happening at work with her? But it's highly predictive of a successful marriage, especially with new children. And the reason for that is that couples who have a really strong love map, who really know each other well, intimately well, can kind of almost predict what each other's thinking or feeling. Like you're running home late from home, or you're running late getting home from work, and you wanted to watch the football game, so your wife starts recording it for you. Like she's just already thinking without you needing to prompt her. That's some of the stuff that I'm talking about. And so they're so effective because you already are in sync with one another. Mm-hmm. So then when a baby comes, which is really disruptive to your life, as you all know, just a little bit, just a little different. If you have that strong connection and you already are on that same wavelength, you don't get derailed as easily. So of those couples that I was just telling you about that had that divorce rate, after a baby, 67% of the people that he was researching saw a drop in their marital satisfaction.
Interesting.
Okay.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
That's a lot.
But let's focus on the 33% that didn't experience that, right? And so what happened with them? What's different? And one of the number one things that was different with that group was that they had these really strong love maps. They really knew they knew so much about each other and how each other was thinking. And they were already used to it's not just about predicting, like, oh, Dave's running late, I should record the game for him.
Right.
But it's also about making time to continue having conversations so that you can continue to grow into the new phase of life with your child, right? Yeah. So one of the biggest reasons that the work was saying that, the marital satisfaction falls is because husbands often feel left out, right? Like, and I was thinking about this recently too, so much of the whole pregnancy, the intention is completely on the mom, and then the baby comes and it's only on the baby. But no one really stops to ask the husband, like, how are you feeling about becoming a dad? And are you okay? Like, how are you managing things? And like, as weird as this sounds to say, but like, how is your heart in all of this, right? No one really thinks to ask the dad that. And so this is a two-way street. So I make sort of the joke about fantasy football, and you should have just as much knowledge about your wife's life as you do about your fantasy football leagues. Yeah. But your wife needs to have that same fantasy football-esque focus on your life as well, so that you both are having this mutual interest in finding each other.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, because, the whole friendship side of things, I think that's what, at least for me, again, I'm speaking about myself, like my wife and I are best friends, right? Like, I know a lot of people say that, but even having children, and, we had them, Rob and I both had kids at the peak of COVID. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And like, you're hearing divorce stories left and right of people like now locked down, living or working all the time at home with their spouse. And, because of the friendship that we've formed and that we've continued to work on, I feel like that's made us stronger, at least. And I'm very interested by this love maps. I'm curious to see like what it would say about us, because where I'm at, I feel like, the friendship side, there's obviously the friendship, the mutual, the intimate side. And like, you need to really like work on all assets to, make your relationship. And now, being parents, were there some tough times adapting to having a kid? Yeah, of course. You know what I mean? Especially not being able to leave the house. Right. Because at the time, if you were pregnant, you're high risk. You went nowhere. Oh, you have a newborn, they're high risk. You go nowhere. So I think the foundational work, or the foundation of us before that, I think is what kind of prompted us to be successful in that time, because of the friendship that we had, the love that we have for each other.
Did you have that thank God moment? I think I definitely did a few times. I'm just like, thank God. Like, because, Court and I, we watch sports together. Like, not everybody has that. No. And I'm just thinking, like, if I didn't have sports during COVID, like, I don't, like, there was seasons of no sports, but, like, even COVID baseball got me through. And I'm just thinking, and I'm sitting there with her, we're both talking about, sports, and I'm like, thank God, right? Yeah. Like, if it was anybody else, like, it's not always common that, like, you share those interests. So, like, just knowing that, like, you, like, picked the right person was a big deal during those times. And
huge.
Well, yeah, and I think going back to what you were saying, I actually think it's, like, I mean, I write wedding vows as part of my living, so I do hear a lot of people say that their significant other is their best friend. But unfortunately, as relationships age, that actually becomes less common. Yeah. And what happens is that we get really used to and comfortable with the status quo, right? Yeah. So we're really comfortable in our relationship. We kind of think we know everything we need to know about our partner. And so it's not that we intentionally stop trying. It's just we're like, oh, I know all of this. And we don't think about, well, how is my partner changing? And this is really important with children, because both men and women go through really extreme changes when a baby comes. So according to this research, I don't know that I would say, this is a little bit dated, still mostly relevant, but I think that we're kind of coming into a new era of working moms. Yeah. And so I don't know that this all holds like strongly true, but I will say that, and I'm sure you've recognized this, women we are bred and raised to be more nurturing, to be more in tune with people's emotions and feelings. And so that's really heightened with our children. Right. And so when a baby comes, a lot of times husbands and the men in the relationship are kind of, I don't want to say surprised, but maybe they're like jarred by the fact that my wife, who was so dedicated to me and to our relationship, is now spending like 90% of that energy on their child. And so that's where I was talking about earlier, that like left out feeling happens. And so the research kind of goes on to talk about how when those couples, those 33% of couples that survive, and like some of those people, half of that 33% said that their relationship got better after having children. And what happened, I know, but what happened in those relationships, the number one predictor, according to the research, is that the husband came along with the wife and her, you know, becoming a parent. So if you walk into parenthood together, you hold hands and you walk into that together, you're much more likely to succeed. What happens, and what the research suggests, is that, like we were talking about, like the focus is always on the mother and then it's on the baby, and there's kind of no, where does the husband fit? And like, it's not like a husband's breastfeeding, although I read recently that you can buy those things if you really, if that's your jam. But, you know, and so a lot of times what happens is husbands kind of fade into the background. The dads kind of, instead of like saying, no, I want to be part of this, I want to have my own space with the feedings. So maybe you can't feed your child, right, if your wife is breastfeeding, but you can burp your child, or you can be part of the ritual to carry your child to your wife and sit there with her while it's happening. So men who step into those roles and are more willing to be a part of those processes, those relationships thrive and are so much better than those husbands who feel sort of left out and then fade into the background. And that's a two-way street problem, because one is communication, which we were going to talk about too, right? If you don't communicate that you're feeling left out, your wife is really consumed by the baby. So she's probably not going to notice it as much. But also your wife does need to make an effort to pick up on that. Hey, I noticed that you don't seem as interested in X, Y, and Z. What's going on? Let's talk about it. Yeah. So it becomes that two-way street that you both need to have. And that shows that mutual respect, interest. And if you have those love maps beforehand, you're much more likely to have those conversations than you would if you didn't have that strong connection beforehand.
Did you do the floor sleep during breastfeeding?
The what?
Did you sleep on the floor, the baby's room, while she was breastfeeding? You ever do that?
Nope.
I did that a lot.
The way, did you really?
Yeah, I don't know. It was just like a thing.
Sweet.
Like we would just go, and like she was up, I was up, I would just go in there, and like she would get done, and like whatever she was doing, and then it's that. It's like you burp and you know.
No, we always had, like Lisa just fed the kids in bed, like just came in. But, you know, again, she breastfed, so there's not much I can do in that sense. So I usually try to, like, get some sleep then, and then whenever the kid would wake up and feed around, you know, 4:35, 5:30, whatever it was, then I would just take them out and let her get 3-4 hours of uninterrupted sleep. That was kind of our shtick. But I feel like communication, back to what you were saying, is like, that's before kids, it's during having kids, that's after. Like, I feel like that's such like a huge foundational piece. And like, it's not even just being able to communicate. I want to tell you my feelings, or it's being able to notice when something changes in the way that the communication of you has. And let's be real, that happens. You know what I mean? Like, whether it's significant or not, or all of a sudden, you know, you might notice someone could be a little bit guarded, and I'm not just saying this about my wife, I'm saying just relationships in general, right? You know, I think staying in tune with the communication side of a relationship is just so important. And let's be real, COVID was a huge one. Becoming a parent has been a huge one. I've lost a ton of friends in the last 4 years. Sure. And communication is a huge part, because it just started dwindling, because I have only so many hours to give in a day, or so many, you know, times that I can really take out my phone and be like, all right, let me send these few text messages, which is like sad, right? But at the end of the day, who do I care about the most? I care about my wife. I care about my children, my family, some friends. You know what I mean? So like, you have to put a very concerted effort into it.
Well, and that goes back to love maps are important for all relationships. So, like, if you've lost some of those friends, like, maybe that's, the effort wasn't both ways. So I don't think it's your fault. Like, Eric and I don't have children and you guys do, and we still make a concerted effort to be around you all. And because we, that there's that intentionality to continuing to have those relationships. So this is applicable to all relationships. Yeah. And the love maps are important, not just for babies, but job changes. Yeah. You lose a job, you have a new job, your job responsibilities suddenly change and it's a lot more stressful at home. Yeah. Like having these the love maps makes those transitions easier too. It's not just children, but since we're on Dad Bod, I figured we should focus on the kiddos.
I feel honored that I get text messages from Dave now. I'm like pretty.
Wow.
Wow. All right, Britt, we got to talk.
Okay.
I saw the Four Horsemen. I'm not sure what Johnny Walker and Jack Daniels have to do with this conversation, but I'm extremely interested.
Yeah.
Were they good parents? Or?
No.
I don't think they were either. Yeah,
no.
Probably not.
Yeah, so the Four Horsemen are John Gottman's sort of, in all that research we were talking about and how he was able to predict divorce, these were the 4 key things that came up. And typically all 4 of them would exist in a relationship that was sort of, for lack of a better word, like destined for failure. Mm-hmm. Now, like we talked about before, if you can course correct and you can kind of remove some of these things, your relationship can get better. But there's 4 horsemen, and he calls them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which is like, these are the really bad things. Now, before I get into them, it's important to note that all 4 of these things are things that I have no doubt you have done, I have done, my husband has done, every single person that's watching has done. And that's because, like, they are things that we tend to just do naturally, like as like a human response. Okay. The problem with them is if you are doing them in excess. So if you're overusing them, if your default goes to any one of these 4 things.
I'm very intrigued.
Yeah, then these are the problems. Okay, so let's dive in. All right, so the first one is criticism. So criticism is different than complaint. This is how he sort of differentiates. Okay. So a complaint is, hey, I'm really upset. I asked you to take the trash out this morning and it didn't happen. When can you make that happen? Right? A criticism is, what is wrong with you? I don't understand why you can't remember to take out the trash. I've asked you 4 times and it's still not done. I'm done with this. Right? So there's a big difference. It goes back to communication. Yeah. So how do you, is there loving intent to the communication that you're having with your spouse? So if you're critical, that tends to make people feel really not good. It communicates, it communicates like a distaste for the other person. It makes the other person feel really nasty. Mm-hmm. So we've all been guilty of this, right? Like, I'm out of frustration. I know I've said I've asked you to do this several times. Why isn't this done, right? But it's not a default. It shouldn't be the default thing go to. So I'm sure that, you can think of times when you're like, I've said these things. But a lot of times the couples that have healthy relationships, they'll feel that sense of regret of ooh, probably shouldn't have said that way, or I shouldn't have done that. And then there's an apology and there's a conversation that happens afterwards. That's a healthy way to deal with this horseman. But when you're dealing with it as a default, there's no way out of it.
No, there's definitely no way, because I feel like, those 2 examples that you gave of how you could say that, you say it that second way, how many times do I have to tell you this? If that's how you handle almost every situation, that's going to build resentment. It's going to build, and but first I guess I could, because, my wife only has to tell me things 1 time, and every time it's done.
I heard that about you.
Yeah. Every time.
Not from her, though.
Everyone.
I don't know if she would agree with that.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. She definitely would not agree. I'm working on it. But to that point, it's how you handle it, right? And I feel like if you come off with that kind of nasty tone or the way that it's delivered, yeah, sure, take a few hits, but then if that's your default,
right,
that's going to build resentment. I'm going to be like, I can't stand the way you talk. I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I think that happens once, right? But if it happens twice in a row, you would just shut down, right? It doesn't. Yeah. Yeah. I don't. Yeah, it's we've definitely gotten there, right? There's been times where we've gotten there, and it's usually me because I can't remember to tie my shoes in the morning, but. Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, yeah, it's a big deal. And I think that probably feeling beat down in your relationship when you're already like balancing the weight of the world with kids and responsibilities, work and everything. It's just, yeah, that feels terminal.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it's funny that you say that too, because these 4 horsemen are more common in relationships where both people are feeling depleted.
Interesting.
So you're feeling like your battery's really low. Yeah. These are things that tend to come out. Like, again, we're humans. And so these are the things that kind of come out of us when we're depleted, when we're not feeling our best, when we're not getting enough sleep, when we're not sort of self-care, when we're not taking care of ourselves. So you will notice that in times of high stress, but it's how, you kind of come back to each other. And like going back to what you were saying, like it also goes back to love maps. Like I know I've asked my husband to do things and I'm like, okay, like I asked him like a couple weeks before Christmas to help figure out, we were having problems with our hamper. I know it sounds dumb, but like I was so frustrated with the hamper. And I was like, can you please just be responsible for the hamper? I don't care what happens. And like, I thought maybe around Christmas and nothing happened. And then he comes home yesterday with a full schematic for how he's going to rebuild this section of our room. So we have these beautiful new hamper thing that's going to, and awesome. I was like, okay, cool. But in my mind, I kind of knew that it was going to get there, right? Because my love map told me like, I do have to tell him maybe once or twice, maybe more than that, but he's going to handle it. Yeah. It's going to happen. And so if it's not like super important, which it wasn't, then I'm not going to, sort of, for lack of a better word, nag. But on the other end of it, if it is something that's really important and someone's ignoring that request, that can also lead to that feeling of criticism. And it also leads to the second horseman, which is contempt. So contempt is, there's a couple of ways that contempt is communicated in relationships, but the number one way is sort of by default comparison. So like, I can't believe you would do that. I would never have done something like that to you.
Yeah. Ooh.
Right? Like that sort of like, I'm holier than thou, that can be really hard in a relationship because it sets one person above the other.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Again, every relationship has probably experienced this on some level. But if it's constantly somebody saying like, I can't believe you would do that. I would never have done that to you. Like,
I feel like you could even do like for parents, like maybe just the way that they said something to kids or handled a situation or the way they cut the grapes. Like, how could you give them,
full grapes?
Like, what is this?
What are you trying to kill our kids?
And I feel like that goes in so many ways, but especially for parents, because you have your relationship side, you have, that aspect, but then you also have like the parental side of things. And of course, you would hope that there has been some sort of communication prior on like, hey, this is my thought for a family. This is my thought for how they'd be raised.
And that's how you cut the damn grapes.
And this is, I have a thing with grapes. They scare me. Even if they're cut into quarters, I'm just like, see, are you breathing? Take a sip of water. Let's really wash that thing down. I don't know. Grapes scare the daylights out of me.
I don't. I mean, they scare me too, but I have a dog and they're toxic to
Very
dogs,
toxic,
so it's different.
Yep.
Different fear, or same fear, different reasons.
Different reasons.
But yeah, it's actually interesting that you say that because while these are predictors of divorce, they're also predictors of ending any relationship. So, and that includes parent-child relationships too. So it's something to really be thoughtful of as your children get older. This tends to be something that parents, this contempt one, because we don't realize what we're saying, what we're communicating is like, have your parents, I know my dad and my mom have said this to me at times, not realizing they were doing this, but, I never would have done that when I was your age. Yeah. Well, that's a contemptful thing to say, and you don't realize it, and it wasn't the default, so luckily, like, it didn't ruin any relationships, but could you imagine being told that constantly over and over and over? You really have to be careful with the things that you say to your children as they're growing. So these things will predict ending relationships of any relationship style. The book specifically focuses on marriages, but these are things you want to watch out for in any relationship.
Absolutely. What's the third?
The third one is defensiveness, and this is honestly when I learned this one, I was like, I'm out. I'm out because I am somebody who, if I'm being blamed for something and I did not do it, I will get very defensive. The problem with defensiveness in relationships, and I this is the one I struggle with most, is it communicates that if it's not my fault, it's probably your fault, right? Yeah. So even if, you know, like an example that the book gives is like, you know, the wife asks their husband to like pick up milk on the way home and they forget. And so the wife's like, you forgot the milk. Like, this really upsets me. Maybe they're doing, you know, not criticism, but they're doing a complaint. And the husband goes, well, you know what? I had a really long day. You knew that I had a really tough day today. You know, it's not my fault that I couldn't remember to pick up the milk, right? And so, like, we find ourselves in these, like, micro moments of this. Defensiveness is one of the, like, the book calls it, like, a more stealthy horseman, because we actually tend to default to this a lot.
I could see that being more of, like, an easier default, especially compared to the other two. It's hard not to get like your situation where, especially if you, like, or at least really think, no, I'm right here,
right.
like, yeah. I'm about to bring out a pie chart and show you like how this is not my fault. But yeah, no, defensive. I feel like it's
a toughie.
It's almost like you're negating point of view, right? Like,
yeah,
and that's like the biggest thing. And that that's probably one of the things that we talk about the most is just like, this is not necessarily the truth. This is my perception. I think that we've gotten a lot better at talking about that. It's like,
love that.
It may not be the way that you feel or the way that you see it, or it may not even be the way that things actually transpired, but my perception and my feeling on things is this, so that at least, you know, like Cord will do it, I'll do it, but like, you know, my point of view and the way that I feel about how something transpired, even if it wasn't intention, even if it wasn't reality.
Yeah.
It doesn't impact emotion always, right? So like, it's important to understand that there may be like an emotional reaction of something that's like outside of like the actual conversation, and that you're communicating that emotional reaction because it may be almost irrelevant to what actually happened. And I think we've gotten a lot better with that recently, especially with having kids, and just, I think, you know, especially the first one, you kind of lose a little bit of that communication. You're just so freaking tired.
So
you know,
tired.
you don't have time to conversate. You don't have time to do anything. It's a lot of checklist. And then something gets missed on the checklist, and then you end up kind of running into these things. But I don't know. It's helped a lot, I think.
Yeah, I love that. I love, like,
for sure.
That's such a great thing. And that is one of the suggestions for this is, you know, I'm not saying that you did or didn't do this. This is my perception. This is how I feel. Using I statements is like one of the number one things that people recommend in these conversations is like, I feel this way. This is what I'm seeing, how I'm feeling. And that's a lot less defensive inducing than like, you did, why didn't you? And another, the part that I have the biggest problem with, that I struggled most with the recommendations in this book for defensiveness, is that you should accept some responsibility. And I remember when I first learned this, we talked about it when I was working at Penn, and my boss at the time, she was talking about this, and I was like, absolutely not. I will not take responsibility for something that I had nothing to do with.
Yeah.
And then, like, not long after that, Eric and I had an argument about something like super inconsequential. And I saw it happening in the conversation. Because once you learn these things, it's hard to not see them when they're happening in your relationship. And so imagine. I was like, oh no, I'm being really defensive right now. And I was like, but I'm being defensive because it's not my fault. Like, this wasn't my fault. And then, of course, because I learned the tools, and I was like, all right. And so what they ask you to do is sort of think about, do you have any responsibility in this? And it might be something as simple as like, I could have communicated this better. Now, this isn't to add sort of extra responsibility on myself, like, oh, you know, I had to remind you 4 times instead of 3 times. Like, it's not about that, but it's more about, did you handle it well when the thing happened? Yeah. So sometimes taking responsibility isn't taking responsibility for the action, but it's taking responsibility for your reaction. So we got into an argument about whatever it was, and then I went back and I said, you know what, I got really defensive about that. I could have handled that better. This is why. This is what I perceived. This is what I saw. Yeah. And we ended up having a really good conversation. But it's taking that responsibility part. Definitely. That's really hard. It's the hardest thing. But if you don't do it, all you're communicating is that it's the other person's fault. And that can be really hard.
Especially reaction, like you said, if it's something super inconsequential.
Right.
Like, yeah, you didn't take the trash out. Like, what is the actual impact of that?
Right.
Like, your kitchen's going to smell for 20 minutes. Like, right. It doesn't, Yeah, it doesn't really actually mean anything, but I think, yeah, I see it too, because even like to get into the momentum of a conversation that is kind of inflection in your voice, like anything that you kind of put out there, I mean, there's blame there, right? In my opinion, like self-blame, like I attacked, I went at something way harder than I needed to.
Yeah. And so all of these culminate into the fourth Horseman, which people hear a lot, and it's called stonewalling. So it's basically when the three previous one leads to this. So when you have an abundance of criticism, an abundance of contempt, an abundance of defensiveness, people start to do what's called stonewalling, which is really just another way of shutting down. It's just, but it's different than the silent treatment. Okay. In that the silent treatment is, I don't want to talk to you right now, or, stonewalling is like a complete withdrawal to the point where you don't care. Yeah. There's a video that we show of this in the class that I teach where the wife is sort of like having an argument or trying to have a conversation with her husband, and he just like stands up, walks out of the room, goes to the bathroom, shuts the door in the middle of the conversation, like just completely doesn't say anything. But typically that's the last stage of this Horseman thing. Now this is different than I need a break, right? Yeah. So there are times when arguments get so heated that the best thing you can do for the argument is to walk away. Some of the worst advice out there, which is some of the most common advice, is never go to bed angry. That is really bad advice, actually, according to the research. Interesting. Because if you try to force a conversation that you're just not ready to have, especially when you're depleted, right before bed, you're trying to get sleep, the best thing you can do in that situation is say, I'm still feeling frustrated. I want to talk about this. I'm feeling depleted. I need to recharge. Let's revisit this in the morning or tomorrow after work or whenever we have the time to do it. Going to bed angry is, I don't want to say it's healthy, but the way that you end the conversation then. So it's not like I'm not talking to you, not talking to me, our backs are to each other. It's I'm telling you that I'm depleted. I'm communicating how I'm feeling. I'm depleted. I'm frustrated. I want to keep talking about this, but I don't have it in me anymore. I need to get some sleep and then we can revisit. That's not stonewalling. That's saying I need a break. Right. And there's research that suggests that even just like 20 minutes of a break can be enough to bring your physiological response down so you can have and re-engage in a conversation. But if you're starting to feel like your physiology responding to an argument, like your heart's racing, you're feeling sweaty, like you're feeling like you're hyperventilating, you're carrying all that in your chest, the best thing you can do is walk away. But it's walking away with the intention of coming back. Stonewalling is walking away with no intention of ever coming back. Yeah. The going to bed, I'd never heard that it was like common advice. It's common advice to never go to bed angry.
Yeah, it's like in every
it's like the number
old
one
speech and everyone.
Yeah. I don't like to go to bed angry, not because I just have this weird thing in my head that it's like, or you don't sleep, like you sit there and then I'm like, are we both just sitting next to each other right now when we could be talking, and then we're just going to sit like this and then we'll talk about it at 3 a.m. when neither of us have been sleeping because we're upset about this.
The awkward moment where her hand hits you and you're like,
yeah. Oh God. What was that? Are we talking now? But it's also like, even like, and again, this is just me, and I it could be different from everyone else, but like even leaving the house without having a conversation, just being like, get out of my face, or I can't, like that I struggle with, because again, we're talking about risk here. Like we don't know, nobody knows, but who's to say I don't get in the car and I die right there? Sure. Who's to say she doesn't get in the car and dies right there? I get it. You can't just resolve like, all right, sit down. Yep. This is the problem. Like it doesn't work like that. But I feel like I always try to start at least the process of mending, or at least figuring out what the root of it is. Every situation is different, what you're doing at that time. But there's, I don't know why I'm like that. I don't. No, but this isn't saying that you can't start those conversations or have those conversations. It's more about like forcing, like if your spouse is saying to you, I need space, and you're like, no, I'm not going to give you that space. We need to resolve this right now. Like that's where problems can kind of come in. But if you're saying, I want to resolve this, and she's saying, well, I need some space right now. And you say, okay, what the recommendation is say, okay, when can we come back and talk to this? Like,
20 minutes from now, can you take a beat for 20 minutes and we can come back to it? Like the whole going to bed, and part of the reason why the advice exists is for what you were just saying. Like, who's to say I don't fall asleep and I have an aneurysm and die in my sleep, right? But I know it was rough.
It's dark.
I'm a writer, so sometimes it's dark in here. But this goes back to the love maps, actually. And so what I would say in that situation is it's not about going to bed angry. So anger, this is like, I'm trying not to get too deep on you guys, but anger is actually a mask emotion. It's not, anger often is something we express when we're actually feeling hurt, ashamed.
Yeah.
You know, it masks an emotion that we're uncomfortable with, so we're angry. So we're often not going to bed angry as much as we're going to bed sad, disappointed, you know, embarrassed, ashamed, whatever. And so what I'm certainly not saying is like, the other day, I remember Eric and I were like frustrated with each other, and he went to go run an errand, and I just remember as soon as he walked out, like, oh my gosh, I should have been like, I'm still mad at you, and we need to talk about this, but I love you, please be safe. Like, that's what I'm saying. So it's not about, I need to force this resolution before something happens, but that goes back to that love maps. Like, I love you, and we're mad at each other, but we're going to resolve this. We're going to get through it. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
We need to recognize that and say, okay, we need to have a conversation about this, but like, let's not let this impact our sleep or impact my ability to go to work. And we can come back to this knowing we'll reach a resolution. It's going to be okay.
It's not stonewalling.
It's not stonewalling.
Yeah. And I will admit, you know, I've been with Lisa for 13 years now, you know, so I will admit that in the beginning of the relationship, I was definitely more like, if there was an issue, I was like, no, like, let's resolve this right now. Like, let's talk about this. You know what I mean? And that was my way of dealing with things. Obviously, that was not her way of dealing with things. I've definitely gotten much better at that. Obviously, now because I know her more. I know her better. I know how to try to deal with those situations, but it still doesn't. It still kills me. Like, even though deep down I'm like, I'm like, all right, I'll go downstairs.
I'm gonna, but I'm not.
Yeah. Like, if I hear her snore and I'm like, oh,
she's not that upset.
I was just kidding. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that that's important. And that also comes down to just like communication, right? Like you start to understand that, and you start to like, as much as that does kill me, because again, my natural response is like, I want to just talk about this now. Mm-hmm. And even if it's something that like on the flip side, like she pissed me off, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to be like, I need space, go away from me. Like, I hate that resolution. That's just me personally, right? Like, I'd rather be like, this is what you did wrong, or this is what made me feel this way. Not necessarily that you did something wrong, but this is why I feel this way. Let's talk about that. Like, I'm very, like, open to the point. And she's not, and that took a little bit to get used to, right? But, like, at the end of the day, I feel like it's, you know, what she needs is obviously important. And granted, hope, you know, those moments are not as prominent throughout an entire relationship. There's happiness. There's all of the other stuff in between. So when those moments do come, it's like, all right, I have to like fight everything inside of me right now to just like peel off.
Yeah.
You gotta take those mental notes too. Like I think about those nights, and I feel like if we're trending towards that, I think about, you know, when it happens once, it happens twice, whatever. You think about that moment, and you're like, I don't want this to get there. Yeah. And you kind of have to like reel yourself in and be like, look, like this is where it's heading. We've been here. We've been together long enough to know that, and just kind of bring it back in, a little self-reflection, and kind of just try and nip it in the bud and not stay up until 2:00 in the morning talking about nonsense, the trash.
Right. Yeah.
Whatever it is.
Exactly. And I think that's the key too, that a lot of couples, and the book talks about this a little bit too, but a lot of couples face like, especially if their love maps are weaker, or if they're something is sort of shaking the foundation a little bit, an argument can feel like a really big deal. Yeah. And you could sort of get this negative thinking of like, oh my gosh, you know, my partner hates me, or, you know, and you have to remind yourself that like every argument you've had before was resolved, and this one will be resolved too, and it's going to be fine. And the trash isn't worth, you know, the end of your relationship. And I think that's something that I know personally has been a journey for me. So I don't know if either of you knew this, but I used to have like really bad anger problems, like really bad anger problems. And I had to do a lot of work on myself to understand, like, okay, like the anger came from a fear of abandonment. And so anytime somebody would like get upset with me, I was like, they're going to leave me. And so then I'm getting angry and I'm lashing out because if it's if I'm in control of that, then it's not as hurtful than if they are. Right. And so I had to do a lot of work with, figuring out that anger is a mask, one, and two, it's temporary. Yeah. It's not something that's going to last me forever. And I've asked myself a lot when I'm upset about something, like, is this really worth me feeling upset about? And I think that's something too, like, again, especially parents who are dealing with feeling depleted. The triggers are, the fuses are shorter.
Right.
The triggers are more plentiful.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. And so taking a beat and saying, do I really mean to be, like, if I was fully rested and there was no other stress in my life, would this really bother me that much? And if the answer is no, there's often times where, like, I'm going to talk to Eric about this. And then I think about it, I'm like, I'm actually not mad about this. Yeah. And I don't know why I was. And then it doesn't need to be a conversation or an argument at all.
Yeah.
Just making sure that you're...
like, if that diaper was full of pee and not shit, like, we wouldn't be having this conversation. This is twice today. It's everywhere.
All right, well, I feel like this may have been the deepest conversation we've had in the pod yet. And it's our first one, not with a guy guest. So this has been incredible. But I feel like let's try to talk about something on the happier end of the relationships. And because as tough as things get and as hard as it can get, at the end, we're still looking for all the good, right? We're still looking for what we fell in love with for the first, at first. So
yeah.
I know we had talked about a few topics of, more about love languages. So why don't you kind of dive into that?
Yeah. So there's 5 love languages. There's a lot of research on this. Again, these love languages can be great for couples, but they're also really great for parent-child relationships, sibling relationships, friendships. It's good to know the people in your life, the love languages that they have. And so there's 5 of them. The first is quality time. So this is just, if your partner's love language is quality time, it means they really want to be around you specifically. And it doesn't matter as much what you're doing, just that you're spending time together.
Yeah.
So that's an easy one. The second one is physical touch. This doesn't have to be intimate physical touch, although in intimate relationships, intimate physical touch is obviously important.
Right.
But especially when you're thinking about friendships, even when professional relationships, physical touch is still a thing. That's when you're looking at high fives, back slaps, things like that. You see it all the time in football, and those guys seem to love each other. All of their top love language is physical touch.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Quality time, physical touch, acts of service.
Okay.
So acts of service is a tricky one.
I was going to say that I feel like that's like, define that a little bit.
Yeah, so acts of service is doing something for your significant other that they wouldn't necessarily want to do themselves, right? So, for example, I really love cooking.
Right.
Like, I really enjoy it. It's one of my favorite things to do. So, Eric offering to cook for me wouldn't feel like an act of service. I'd appreciate it, but it wouldn't feel like an act of service. However, this whole past week, he has done the laundry for me because I've been, like, swamped at work. And I just am, like, so overjoyed and grateful and, like, feel so loved. And he hasn't really said anything to me about it. He's not like, look at what I'm doing. It's just like, I see that this needs to get done. And it's not something, I don't enjoy doing the laundry. And so act of service is one of my top love languages. So for him to just see it, do it, like, that is a really big deal to me. So an act of service is doing something for your significant other, for your child, for your parent, for whomever, without them asking, without them needing to ask you to do that.
Okay.
And so it's just a way to show love and affection. But if they enjoy doing that thing and you offer to do it, it's not going to feel like an act of service. It's not necessarily unappreciated. It's just not going to feel that same
For
love
sure,
language.
I totally get that. It's a good example. You actually like doing the laundry?
Yeah, I like to have all of my clothes available all the time. I don't like that there's stuff that I can't use because it's in this status of not being clean.
So it's more about...
But I hate putting it away. I like cleaning it. I'm okay with folding it, except for kid laundry, because that is, I mean, that's like torture. You can fit so many small little, it's like folding up Barbie and Ken stuff.
Yes.
But a full load of laundry of it's
I
the worst thing in the entire
I
world.
saw this meme, and it was like, the devil opens up hell, but not quite hell. It's just heck, and it's like lesser torturous things. It
Yeah.
sounds like, and it's like
Folding
you get
kids'
stuck
laundry.
in
Yeah.
traffic all day, every day,
Oh, God.
folding kids' laundry.
Yeah.
It sounds like
It's
it would
up
be
there.
your heck.
Yeah. I know. I like having all available options
Fair.
available. All
So
the
it's
time.
more about having the availability. It's not like, man, I am loving
No,
that
but
I'm doing wash
no,
right
there's
now.
some gratification in it, right? Because
Sure.
it's just like an easy, like you can do it. Anybody can do it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it takes a certain amount of time. And then when it's done, you feel like, wow, it's done.
Accomplished.
Yeah, accomplished.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
don't get that a whole lot in my day. So. Just telling you. Sometimes.
Having a real shitty day, I'm gonna go do the laundry. I
You know,
I
try
need
it
to
out.
pick me up.
You
I
ever,
might,
like,
maybe.
You ever paint? And painting is, that's like one of the best things you can do.
Oh my
'cause
God.
Oh,
the
I
room
hate
looks like
painting.
complete shit, right? And you paint it, and then it doesn't.
But
and you're
see,
like,
painting
that looks so much
sucks.
better.
I like having painted. I don't like painting. Right?
Yeah.
So like I like that I can see that it's done now.
Yeah.
But I don't
I like
like
having the stretch of time to be able to paint, where I don't have to think about anything.
That's
If it takes
fair.
me 5 hours to paint something, and I know I'm not going to get interrupted for that 5 hours, my mind just completely shuts off.
But then, like, if you're
I
in this
understand.
house, if you hear like a screaming kid up there, you're just like I feel like I'd be like, I gotta put this paintbrush down, to see what happened.
Well, that's what I mean. The time, if you have the allotted time,
Oh, true, right, yeah,
Yeah.
good point.
I can see
it's
it.
like the kids are at Grammy's house. You know,
Daddy's painting today.
I feel like if the kids are at Grammy's house, wouldn't you like want to do something that's not painting?
See, that would be my natural response.
Right?
I'm
Like
not
I would
picking
want to
up a
be like, let's
paintbrush.
go to brunch. like,
I like to do stuff. I like to feel accomplished.
He is. I
It's
mean,
a big accomplished
he-
thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can see it. You're like Eric in that way too. He spent all day yesterday welding his.
Yeah, because when you get done, you're like, I just did that.
I just
Yeah.
did that. Yeah, he was very proud of himself too.
So what's the fourth?
The fourth one is words of affirmation.
Okay.
So that's a simple one, like compliments. But the key here is it needs to be genuine. You can't just say like, "Oh yeah, honey, you look great. Let's go. Are you ready?"
Yeah.
It's got to feel like it really means something. It's got to feel that genuine essence to it. And then the last one is gifts. Gifts is a tricky one because a lot of people are like, ooh, people who like gifts. They just like to get things. But it's not about the gift. It's about the thought that went into the gift. So my sister is a gifts person, but one of her favorite things to get is like little postcards from people. And like, it's just like, oh, someone thought of me and like got this for me. So it's more about, people who like receiving gifts and whose love language that is, feel like, oh, you thought of me and made an effort to do something to show me that you were thinking of me. And so, yeah, so those are the 5 love languages. It's really important to know them about your partner. I know a lot of people hate taking quizzes. My husband hated taking the 5 love languages quiz, but I needed to know. You can find it on it's like 5lovelanguages.com, and it's like a 5-minute quiz. It takes no time at all. You and your spouse should both take it. And then you'll know each other's love languages and be able to speak them more fluently and frequently. And again, research shows that the more you speak your partner's love language, the better your relationship outcomes are, the stronger your relationships are, the deeper your love maps go. So it kind of all ties together really nicely.
That's awesome. I feel like this is like one of the most real conversations we've had on the Dad Bod pod yet. So I really do appreciate you coming on, talking with us. I don't think it'll be the last. I feel like we could uncover so many deep topics throughout this. I will put the link for the quiz that Britt just mentioned, as well as the link to the 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work by John M. Gottman, PhD, as well below. But as I mentioned in the beginning of the episode here, Britt has her own small business, Britt Leigh Writes, and the floor is yours. Tell us all about it. Tell us, the viewers, what they can expect.
Yeah, so Britt Leigh Writes is like a full-service writing business. So I offer writing coaching. So like I mentioned, I am a ICF, International Coaching Federation certified coach. I'm actually about to get my 2nd level certification, my professional certification. So I'm really excited
Congrats.
about that.
That's
Thanks.
exciting.
Yeah. 500 hours of coaching.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a lot.
I don't
a
think
lot
I've
of
done
hours.
anything for 5 hours.
So I'm a writing coach, and I work with writers who are interested in writing novels, short stories, and I help them bring their stories from sort of idea to, a ready to publish book. And that's been going really well the last couple of years. It's really fun. Awesome. I do editing for those books, or if you don't need me as a coach, but you just need editing, I do that. And then as another aside to my freelance business, I write wedding vows and wedding speeches, and it is so much fun. I've been doing it for about 5 years now, and I think I'm too shy of the 100 mark.
All right.
Yeah. So
That's actually pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Congrats.
So actually, if you mention this podcast, I'll give your viewers a discount if they need wedding vow or wedding speeches. Yeah. Or if they need writing coaching or editing. Yeah. If you mention this podcast, I'll give 25% discount.
Wow.
Yeah.
The first ever discount on Dad Bod Pod, and it is for you. It is for you. No, we appreciate that. Seriously. So again, we will have all of her information below. And if you are interested in her services, she's going to give you a 25% discount after naming this Dad Bod Pod. But here's the thing. You won't do that if you're not subscribed, right? So this is your chance to subscribe to the channel. We're going to have a lot more of this coming up to you soon.
We're going to check, too.
Oh, yeah. We're going to need to see a screenshot of the Dad Bod subscription.
You got to show your subscription status.
Maybe I should make a requirement.
Yeah, I like it. I think it's smart. I think it's a good play. For Dave, for Rob, for Britt, thank you, and have a good night. I feel like I'm in the news now.